So thank you very much for having me here today to speak with you. I'm really looking forward to attending the conference. It was a great pleasure to meet some of you yesterday in the workshop, and I hope to meet many more of you in person as the conference goes on. I'm actually going to go off script for a moment here and just say what a wonderful experience that was to be welcomed in that way for me, and I'm sure for all the other keynotes and for all of you. It's quite a humbling experience to be here and to have the opportunity to share some ideas with you. Obviously, it's my first time in New Zealand, and so I came with a whole bunch of preconceptions, a whole set of things that I appreciate about this country. I had an appreciation of the depth and richness and value of the Maori heritage to this country. Obviously, your sporting prowess, beating England twice in 7 days in 2 different forms of rugby. Thank you. My appreciation of your wonderful natural history. I'm a great fan of what I consider to be one of the most silly animals on the planet, the kakapo, and have raised money for its preservation because silliness should be preserved. And I'm also a big recent fan of one of your 16-year-old musicians, Lords, and I'm really enjoying her latest album. So, I came with all these preconceptions, and I've realized that actually one of the reasons that we have these conferences is so that we can meet each other, and to actually, not that those preconceptions will go away, but actually to build a whole new level of understanding between each other. And I was very much taken and moved by the introduction on that basis, and we'll look forward to meeting you all. So today's talk is avoiding the digital death spiral, surviving and thriving through understanding the value and impact of digital culture. And I hope to take you on a little journey. I'm going to explain a little bit about why I'm here, some of my digital humanities background, and to reflect on some of the wise words that you've already heard as well on the importance of information for us. I'm going to talk about the digital death spiral. And how we avoid it. And my thesis is going to be obviously that we need understanding of how we've made a difference, how we're changing people's lives, how we make a difference to people. And I'm going to talk about some thoughts on value, and particularly one of the things I wanted to emphasize was, although I come from the digital humanities, I have a very strong interest in people being in physical spaces as well. This institution is a very good example of the value of a physical space, to bring people together, to learn new things, to engage in value. But I'll mainly be talking about introducing the balanced value impact model and hopefully giving you something to take away with you so that you can use this back in your institutions and in your daily lives. So let me start at the end. Let me give you a why is this worth doing? The case for impact has to be that we can demonstrate that we're making a change in people's lives or life opportunities, that we can say not just that we're making people wealthy, because that's always the sort of perception that we have. I was at a nanotechnology event. Digital Humanities, we work with some nanotechnologists on various things, and it was clear that the only 2 things that they thought were valuable were, can we make the country more wealthy, can we stop people from dying? And those things are valuable, and we need to be able to make that case, but we also need to make the case in a more rounded, holistic fashion. Rather than just focusing on one particular aspect, we need to have a number of perspectives which come together to make the case for the impact that we are achieving. Are we a more effective and efficient organization in delivering change and tangible benefits? Are we gaining strategic advantage through the innovation inherent in this digital activity? Are we delivering a strong economic benefit to our community that will demonstrate the worth and value of our endeavors in clear monetary terms? And as a community, has that community been changed by the resources, by the services, by our activities in beneficial ways that we can clearly identify? So as a quick look at the payload of this talk, I want you to be able to go away and make those demonstrable evidences back to your leaders. But I'm here from the Department of Digital Humanities at King's College London, based in London, UK. The Digital Humanities is the application of digital technology to digital humanities disciplines, although we work with the sciences and social sciences. And it's also about the reflection upon the impact of digital media upon humanity. We have over 50 academics and researchers. We have 3 masters, a master's in digital asset and media management, which I lead the teaching on with other colleagues, a master's in digital humanities, and 1 in digital culture and society. In 2015, we'll be launching an undergraduate degree in digital culture. And we have lots of PhD students, and I'll tell you more about those in a second. We gain over £2.5 million in research income per annum. We have over 5 million digital objects in our repositories that we have been running in the digital humanities because we've been going for a good part of 20 years. And that's from over 100 collaborative projects. Everything we do is collaborative. And of those objects, 200 million hits in the last 5 years. I didn't know this until a few weeks ago. We've literally only found this out because we hadn't set out to measure this. Because one of the things I want you to take away from this conference is that these numbers are meaningless as measures of impact. You may be impressed by the 200 million figure. You may be impressed by the 5 million digital objects. All they really are is a measure of scale. It tells you we're a big academic department, and we have big problems keeping 5 million digital objects freely and openly available to anyone who wants to access them. And that there are way more people accessing those materials than we thought, because we're talking about fairly abstruse academic content here. So that's really what these numbers are about. Don't take the suggestion from me putting these numbers up that I'm saying we're important, that we're significant. All I'm saying is we're big. So what I thought I would do is, rather than talk to you about what is the digital humanities and all these things, I could talk about our Jane Austen manuscripts collection. I could talk about the work we've done with archives and libraries in South Africa and Sudan. I could talk about our European Holocaust research infrastructure. I thought I would show you. So if you'll excuse me for taking just 5 minutes to show you 3 things which I think are indicative of what the digital humanities are. Now, this bit, I just need to go like this.
Can you describe your thesis in 2 minutes?
Most people think historians spend all their time in the library reading books, and you wouldn't be far off. But recently, the library has gotten too big, way too big, and it's getting bigger at an alarming rate. That's because billions of records have been digitized and are now online. Historians are faced with far more material than they could ever hope to read in a lifetime, or even 100 lifetimes. My research looks at a pretty typical historical question. How were Irish immigrants to London, England treated at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution? But instead of heading to the library, I'm heading to my computer to apply some of the best tricks of computer science to the task, namely distant reading. Distant reading basically means figuring out what something says without actually reading it. It's the type of classifying that Google does to help you find a recipe for an apple pie. Google hasn't read those web pages. Instead, they've created a computer program that does it for them. I'm doing the same thing, but instead of focusing on pies, I'm asking questions like, which documents refer to Irish people? Like Google, I've developed a set of computerized tests to determine if a document is relevant or if it's not. That automation is crucial when you're dealing with databases containing hundreds of millions of words of text. But finding relevant material isn't all we can do in the age of the internet. Computers have also allowed me to measure aspects of 19th century life in which the Irish experience differed from that of a typical Londoner. For example, I can tell you that an Irish person was roughly 4 times more likely than an English counterpart to appear in a London court on trial for his or her life. There's no way we would ever have found that out without distant reading. We live in a world in which information is overabundant, and managing it effectively can mean the difference between finding what you're after and getting lost in a jungle of data. There's too much to read out there, so it's time we found another way to do it. My name is Adam Crimble. I'm a student at King's College London in the United Kingdom, and the title of my thesis is Understanding the London Irish Immigrant Experience Through Large-Scale Textual Analysis, 1801 to 1820.
Now, it doesn't get much more pleasurable for me to be able to show you one of our PhD students and what they can do. And this is, if you like, a very traditional conception of what digital humanities is, if you like. The way that we use data, textual analysis, all those sorts of terms that are out there. There are other things that we do as well. So I want to show you.
Can you describe your thesis in 2 minutes?
It was good, but it's
Most
not
people
that
think
good.
historians spend their time in the library reading books.
Excuse me.
And you wouldn't be far off. But recently, the library has...
Okay. What's that quote? The great thing about technology? Or the definition of technology is something that doesn't quite work yet. So let me show you this. And I'm going to talk to you about this activity. So this is a project called DataC version 2.0. Michael Takia Magruder with Drew Baker, Jay Jarvis, and Dave Steele have built this model from data that exists in the science community from astronomy. Since the 1940s, radio and television has had enough communication power to break out of the gravity well of the Earth and has been traveling out into space. And what this visualization shows is all of the star systems that our communications have reached in that time since the 1940s, traveling at near light speeds, traveling out into the space of 70 light years or more. And we've categorized each of those objects in terms of what type of star system, whether there are exoplanets that have been discovered out there. And so it's an ability to be able to show, if you like, an Earth-centric view of our little bit of the galaxy and where our communications have been reached in that period of time. And for each light year, they've taken the information of the most used words in that year, and they're appearing as like a data cloud, a word cloud, so you can sort of like move through the word clouds as you get nearer and further away from the Earth. And what this is really is a representation of how the arts, how digital humanities, if you like, as a sort of glue between those activities, and sciences can work together, because this data is available to us. Our ability to visualize this data, our ability to engage with that, the opportunity to say, look, we've actually reached out as a planet and talked to over 2,000 star systems in the history of our communications. It's quite an interesting thing to say. And this visualization was placed in the Victorian Albert Museum and projected onto a planetarium, and had several thousand people come in, lie on the floor, and look up and understand more about our place in the universe. And so there's an aspect here of how do we use data? How do we engage with the sciences? How do we engage with how arts think about things? And this is a project that's very close to my heart. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on if we have time. And this is the Midnight Run. So one of the things that I was wanting to engage with personally was how do we reappropriate spaces? How do we engage with people in terms of their memories, in terms of what they think are their values? I'll talk a bit about the values that are inherent within the balanced value impact model. We actually tested this out with social experimentation with the Midnight Run. And we also it represents some of our relationships to other departments in our School of Arts and Humanities. So with the Cultural Media and Creative Industries department, where we have joint teaching on our digital culture and society, and where we are working on joint projects which relate to memory and experience. So the Midnight Run is something that's created by an artist and street poet, Inu Ellams, and is a 12-hour, what's the phrase to use? I apologize. My brain has gone slightly dead for a moment. It's a 12-hour flash mob, basically. It's put out onto the web. Everyone come here at this particular moment in time, and then Inua takes you on a walking journey through London for 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And we play games, we have experiences, and I joined in and we did some experimentations together. Artists join in to create music, and the artist who made this video used an analog camera to take all of these shots, shooting film at very high speed, and then developing that film in his kitchen, and then digitizing the film, which is why it looks a little bit retro.
By somebody that somebody cares.
That's the first time that I've written how I feel,
Well, sunrise is at 10 but I imagine that's... we actually did it!
And so what I'd like to say is, that's, for me, this is what the digital humanities is about. It's literally that wide, it's that inclusive. It's one of the reasons why I have been so passionate about staying at King's for the last 10 years and enjoying the experience of being there as an academic. And what I wanted to say was also, where does my thinking come from in terms of when I'm thinking about impact, when I was thinking about these issues around digital content? And there's an idea that I have that's really inspired me to think more closely about these issues over the years. And it's a question. Is the value in the wine, the glass, or the drinking? If we think that the wine is the content and the glass is the infrastructure and the drinking is access, where is the value? Can we have any of those without the other? The answer is obviously no. But is it worth having wine if we never drink it? Can we ever drink wine if we don't have a good glass? And what we will find is that all of you in this room will have a different balance as to where you put your emphasis. Some of you will want to have fine wine. And whether it's drunk or not, holding on to that fine wine is really important to you. Others of you, it's all about the drinking. How much access can we provide? Getting it out there. Is it all fine wine? Well, maybe not. But making people happy, giving them the opportunity to drink. And there are some very worthy people here in this room whose job it is to make sure we have a glass, who don't get thanked for that task, but imagine how difficult it would be to drink wine without a glass. And so this balance between these issues is something that is, if you like, a thought experiment, which has driven a lot of my thinking, a lot of my appreciation of why we do what we do and how it relates to each other. And it's a very simple way of expressing the conundrum, the complexity of what we're trying to achieve. I also did a major research project for a UK government organisation called JISC, looking at digitised resources. All of these materials are freely available on the web. You can access all of them for free. I will make this presentation available to the conference providers at NDF and also on SlideShare, so you can get all this information from there. But inspiring research, inspiring scholarship, the value and benefits of digitized materials for learning, teaching, research, and enjoyment. And you'll notice that I actually class enjoyment as being really quite important in the scheme of things. And this looked at the £100 million over the last 15 years that we've spent on digitization in the UK and looked at the way in which we found value and benefits from that. And we did find value and benefits from those materials. What I felt was missing, though, was a sense of the impact, how much we changed people's lives by the provision of those materials. And so this led me into asking the question, how can we measure the impact of digitized resources? And came up with the balanced value impact model. So why do I think impact matters? Why do I think evidence matters? Why do I think having a clear idea of where we're going and why we're going in that direction matters? It's because of this thing I'm going to call the digital death spiral. There's a thing that happens in nature with army ants, which is called an ant mill, or a death circle in army ants. And it's because army ants use pheromones to tell other army ants, hey, over here there's food. There's something good. Let's go in this direction. And occasionally what can happen is the army ant, which has led the way, finds itself coming across its own pheromone trail and starts to follow itself. And it goes round in a circle. And other army ants join in. They're all following each other, thinking that they're on the way to better resources, to food, to a much better place. And so you have this idea of one ant saying, do you know where we're going, right? And someone saying, yes, of course, I'm following Fred. He's awesome. Let's all follow Fred because he knows where he's going. And you actually find out that Fred is just following someone else, who's actually following someone else, who's actually following someone else, in a circular fashion. And that actually what we're doing is we're expending resources and treasure, following people without really ever lifting our head up and saying, are we going in the right direction? Are we making a choice as to the direction we're going? Or are we just following the scent trail of another army ant? And this is such a significant thing that you can actually find examples where the ants will just go around in circles and circles and circles until they just die. Thousands and thousands of ants going around in a circle, searching for food, blindly following their leaders in the hope that they will find food. And so what I'm trying to get over here is not that we're all going to die if we follow others blindly, but that we will spend valuable time and resources and energy that we can't afford to spend. We need to understand why we're doing what we're doing for our institutions, for our audiences, for our stakeholders, for our users. We need to not do digital because digitization equals funding, because it really doesn't. You know that phrase, be careful what you wish for because you may get it? I've had so many experiences. I've worked on over 500 digitization projects, and many of those, the worst thing that happened to those organizations was getting the funding to do the digitization. Because they weren't prepared. They didn't have the staff. They didn't have the infrastructure. They had the wine, but they weren't able to provide the drinking or the glass. So don't do it because digitization is just another way of getting money. Don't do it because digital is everything today. It really, really isn't. It's a channel. It's a way of getting to your audiences. But it's not the only way, and it's not the only thing that you will ever do for them that they will value you for. My favorite, who knows how much it'll cost? But digital's bound to be wonderful. Or planning is so 20th century. Let's be agile. Let's fail faster. Let's do agile development. This is the way forward. You're all laughing. Okay, you've been there. Yeah, I know. Just do it. Let's not plan. Planning's hard. It's difficult to do. Wouldn't it just be nice if we didn't have to plan and then failure could come as a surprise rather than being preceded by a period of worry and doubt? It's also this mantra that being agile, using the fail fast mantra, let's do it, let's fail fast. When you look at how commercial organizations do this, when I talked to the chief executive of Intel in Europe, he said, yeah, we do fail fast. We try lots of different things out. We have a go for 3 weeks or 3 months. We try something. If it fails, we stop. He said, but what we don't do is we don't do it randomly. We don't just try stuff. We plan really detailed reasons why we want to try the thing. We measure all the way through why it has failed. We use that evidence to help us to not fail that way again. So we need to have a more evidence-based way of approaching things. And we certainly mustn't be doing things because our competition or Google or my mate is doing it. One of the most scary things I'm sure all of you have heard is your chief executive wandering back into the office and going, do you know I was talking to so-and-so the other day and they're doing this? And certainly, we're not trying to engage in the because if we built it, they will come. There's too many examples where we've built stuff and found, actually, they don't come because we didn't know who we were trying to help. So let me be a bit controversial for a few minutes here and talk about the shocking and the stealthy. So the BBC abandons a £100 million digital project. So the BBC has scrapped a digital production system which has wasted a huge amounts of license fee payers' money. This is an example of chasing a goal which is very top-down, wasn't driven by the people who are actually going to be using the system, and by a set of stubbornness that this would be, nirvana if we could get there, the one system to rule them all that sort of stuff like this. That's the obvious side of these things. You can imagine that the BBC, if it ever goes and asks for money from a venture capitalist or from a government or from a funder, is going to have a very difficult time convincing them that that money will be spent well again. So it's not about the death of an organization, it's about the death of opportunity, about the loss of opportunity. And let's talk about stealthy opportunity costs. And here I'm going to talk about the Google Art project. I have nothing critical to say about Google or about the Google Art project as a thing that Google is doing. But I have plenty to say that is critical of museums that are throwing themselves at Google to get their content into the Google Art project at quite considerable cost to those people who are, if you like, looking after the glass in this environment, without actually asking themselves the question, why are we doing it? For whom is this benefiting? Is this the most efficient channel for us to get our material out there into the big wide world? I would argue that the wise words of Will Noel when he was at the Walker Art Museum, get your data out there, allow people to use your data. The way the Rijksmuseum is approaching this, where they can say, Google Art Project, that's great, but it's just one of our channels. It's not the only way that we can get materials out there. Opening up your data, making it available, allowing people to use your data, not being focused so much on the interface, but being focused on the value of the data and getting it available is the way to grow. So, do I think the Google Art Project is some sort of active evil that's out there in the world? No, I don't, but surely you could achieve pretty much the same thing using Flickr Pro. And there are other channels that could be out there. And certainly, there are other ways of doing this which don't have such great opportunity costs. My criticism of Google for the Google Art Project, and they appreciate this and they say, look, we'd really like to be able to do more, is that unlike the Google Books project, where millions upon millions of books were digitized, and those digital images will reside with those host institutions, and the metadata will reside with those host institutions, and that will provide for that long-term digital preservation, digital footprint, which will be decades, if not centuries, going forward. What we have here is kind of Europeana light on steroids. And it costs a lot to get stuff in here. So we face a bunch of curation challenges and unfunded mandates. One of the real issues that I have here is the idea that digital is free. That, just as I was saying, obviously, well, if Google Art Project, isn't it wonderful? They created this nice interface. All you have to do is give us your data. That's really easy, isn't it? I've heard the stories of how tricky it is to get that data in there. I've heard the stories of national institutions being given a mandate to hold all of the nation's data in perpetuity on a 3-year funding cycle. We have a whole set of curation challenges about how do we curate the past? How do we think about our intellectual heritage, our material heritage? Maybe we're talking about digitization, but we have this issue, which is how are we going to do collection development for our future collections, for those born digital materials, for the virtual heritage that's out there, for those materials that we want to grasp, as was expressed with regard to the Christchurch earthquake materials. And so this brings me to talking about impact. And here's where I want to challenge you very much to consider a new conception of impact. Because many of us conceive impact as being, did we have a lot of people using our resource? And that is one indicator of impact, but it is not in its own right impact itself. Impact is when we go a bit further than that. We look at the measurable outcomes arising from the existence of a digital resource that demonstrate a change in the life or life opportunities of the community. And why does impact matter so much? Well, we live in an attention economy where there is a tsunami of data. We don't have a shortage of information. We have a shortage of our ability to attend to that information. We also have a shortage of ability to find authority, validity, real data that means something for what we need in our lives. So we need to engage with that attention economy. Don't just think that it's all about, if we just pump information out there, that's all we need to do. We also need to take into account the experience of the UK with the last 15 years, £100 million spent on digitisation projects. What did we get for that? What impact did we make? We made huge impacts. We just don't know what they are because we didn't ask the appropriate questions at the appropriate time. We're now having to go back and look at ourselves to ask those questions. It's about promoting and preserving culture as an important benefit, and remembering that curating these issues helps us to connect with the past and invent the future, and to provide better evidence. That's what we really need, is better evidence as a deeper, richer method of measuring impact. I'm proposing the balanced value impact model. When I looked at this, I studied many different areas of impact. So you may be thinking, well, impact is all about economic wealth, isn't it? But actually, when you look at it, you see there are many areas: education, increasing knowledge, health and well-being, social and community cohesion, entertainment, environmental, economic, political, democratizing, technology and innovation, equality and equity. It can be both internal and external. Let's not ignore the impact of what we do on ourselves, how we've changed ourselves or our partners. We need to be honest about the fact that impact can be positive or negative. It isn't going to always be a good thing that we have achieved for our communities. And it can be intended or not. We may be thinking, oh, we've created this wonderful resource, but actually, we may have unintended audiences out there, and we need to be able to capture them along the way. So, when a digital resource is being used, is there a change occurring, and does that lead to a wider set of opportunities now available to that personal community? And what I wanted to talk about here was the difference between an activity, an output, an outcome, and impact, because they get conflated as terms, and they get conflated as elements. And we need to be, obviously we do an activity, that leads to some outputs. And what we tend to do is we tend to measure those outputs and say, look, haven't we done really well? And funders are complicit in this because they want you to measure those outputs and demonstrate that you've spent the money appropriately. We've taken $1 million, we've given you $1 million, and we wanted, 2 million items delivered online. Did you deliver 2 million items online? And you go, yes, we did. And then everyone goes, that's wonderful. You delivered wonderful outputs. But what that leads to is a mentality where you only actually have one client, and that's your funder. Only one person you've got to impress. You don't really care if their audience is using it or not, because the only person you've got to impress is your funder, who is only impressed if you have achieved what you said you would achieve. This can lead to unexpected, unintended consequences. There's a museum in the UK which has a key performance indicator placed upon it by the government, which is that it will provide online access to 80,000 new digital images in the next 12 months. Doesn't say that they have to be different digital images. Doesn't say they have to be good digital images in terms of usefulness to the community. It's that sort of measure. When you see the measures coming out of the European Commission which say, we want to have another X million digital objects available to the public, there's no sense there in which there's any measure of the value of those digital objects to the audience. It also means that you have disproportionate effects. So video, one digital object, gets treated as if it's only one thing, whereas the book that video may be relating to, which has 300 digital objects, because it was 300 pages long, is given the sense that it's 300 times more valuable. But actually, it's just a different way of representing digital objects. So this counting game, this numbers game, is not helpful to us. So we need to move on from outputs. And of course, we can move to outcomes and saying, look, if we're changing something, in this example here, which is from a health example, which is because there's some very good stats along this, if we've done some health research, we've published those findings, and we've made a change in clinical practice, surely that's impact. Well, actually, still at this point, what we have achieved is an outcome, which is an indicator of impact. And the indicator of impact is when we actually have improved the health and well-being of people. So I'm quite challenging here. How do we get to that impact of improving the health and well-being of people in that way? Because the reality is just because we've changed clinical practice, we may have changed clinical practice and ended up making people less healthy. We all know, there's this new drug treatment that's come along and everyone's using it, and then a few years later you go, actually, no, that's not really the right way to do that. It would have been better if we'd done something else. That's what measuring impact is. It's about understanding your evidence. So as I say, what will success look like? It's those 4 things. And I want to take, this is from a balanced scorecard approach, which you will find many of your governmental organizations and leaders will be reassured by, this economic model. It's looking at it from 4 perspectives. The internal impact, how has your organization been changed? The innovation impact, how have you done new things that you couldn't have done before? The economic impact, how have you made your community looking external to yourselves now? How have you made your community more wealthy? And the social impact, how have you created community cohesion, improved things, the life of your communities? And so the balanced value impact model is a way of doing this. It has 5 stages. It has a review and respond stage, so that you're not just doing it and then sitting there going, well, we've done that, that's great. You're actually taking that information and using it to change the way you do things, to help you to plan your futures. But it has these core questions, which is, what do I want to assess? Why do I want to assess that? And what will I do when I get those results? Because you need to have a purpose in doing this sort of impact assessment, because you will be spending time and money on it, so you need to know that that's going to have a return on your investment, which is going to be worthwhile having. I'm going to concentrate in the next few minutes on context analysis and design, because these are actually the most useful parts of the model in some respects. Anyone who's accessing the report will find a very long report. Just remember that about 60 pages of that is data gathering methods and techniques, and is a glossary of materials there. But again, what I felt was, it was great. We have this toolkit. All these toolkits are out there already. But do we know what we want to do with them? Again, it's like having the engine. Let's tune up the engine on our vehicle here. Here's a load of toolkits, and I'm going, but which spanner do I use? I don't know. This is a way of thinking about the problem so you know which spanner to use. It has 4 elements in it, which is thinking about your digital ecosystem. Do you understand? Can you imagine your digital resource and understand the thing that you're measuring in this digital environment? What is your digital ecosystem? It's going to be a balance of things like content and users and stakeholders. It's going to be about payment. How do you trade with your communities? What are your legal frameworks? What technology platforms and infrastructures are you dealing with? How does it link to other digital resources out there? And this seemed like a fairly obvious thing to put in, understanding the thing that you want to measure. Okay. And at the same time, it's become quite a challenge, because where is the edge of the thing that you want to measure? Europeana was a very good example of this. There's a whole range of aggregated content with a number of providers and aggregators and materials. And yet, where does it exist? It kind of exists as a nexus of metadata in a network of content. And so one of the challenges here is putting a boundary around your digital ecosystem, knowing where your digital ecosystem starts and finishes. And I've been quite prescriptive. I've said, look at this from 4 perspectives. Because remember, what you want to do is, if you look at it from these 4 perspectives, at the other end, that success criteria of being able to show those 4 things. How have we done better? How have we innovated? What's the economic and social impact? Will be how you make your cohesive argument that what you're doing is worthwhile to do. Now, for each of those perspectives, I'm suggesting that there are 5 modes of value to be applied to those perspectives, so that we're not only measuring value from the perspective of use. There are other things that people value about your digital resource other than just, is it something I use? And this is about getting beyond those numbers games. So what's the utility? Yes, how do I use it? How do I value it? I'm valuing this bridge because I can walk over it, rather than valuing its aesthetic value. But also I can value something from the perspective of saying, look, I never use this, but I value its being there, its existence, its prestige, its value to our community, even if I don't personally use it. This example is St. Paul's Cathedral. I've never been in St. Paul's Cathedral, but I'd be absolutely mortified if anyone tried to knock it down. What's the education value? What did I learn that I didn't know before? What's the community value? How does this enhance community cohesion? How does this bring us together? How does this maybe enable a community to exist that didn't exist? You could look at the way that crowdsourcing or volunteering has enhanced the way that communities can exist around digital collections. And it's about inheritance bequest value. We've all spent a lot of time collecting our materials. Surely there's a value in measuring the value of that inheritance and the bequest of that to future generations. And I've had anecdotal evidence yesterday from the workshop which suggested that actually this is one of the things that the public values most about a museum, a library, an archive, is that bequest to future generations. So, I'm making it look extremely easy. If you're clear about your perspectives and values, you feed them into the balanced value impact model, and woohoo, the rest is easy. Out the other end comes neatly packaged evidence. It isn't as easy as that. It is a challenge to do this activity, but what I'm hoping to do is convince you that it is worthwhile. Let's give you a very brief look at an example. So the Wellcome Library is using the balanced value impact model to measure code breakers, the makers of modern genetics. So that all sounded a bit wishy-washy, but actually, when it comes down to it, what you do is you take those ideas, you work through the model, and you end up with a plan. And the plan looks something like this. So within that perspective of social use, you can have an objective. How do those with interest in the intellectual content find it useful for their research? And then we talk about our stakeholders and other methods. We can talk about communities. Peer organizations and members of our professional communities have changed their policy and practice concerning digitization. How have we changed our community? It could be about innovation. So the Codebreakers project has enabled new potential activities and research methods for those interested in the intellectual content. Or the extent to which Codebreakers has created the possibilities for organizations and professional members of that cultural heritage community. It could be about how we've changed as an organization, how have we developed. What about the inheritance bequest? How does Codebreakers represent the inheritance of the Wellcome Trust Library's activities since collecting began, and how does it prepare the library for the future and bequeath benefits to future generations? And they could look at it from an economic perspective for their users. What is the net economic effect of making the content freely available online? And so these are a range of opportunities. And you can see that what may seem like a very ephemeral model, when you actually get into it, actually leads to a very clear plan of what to do and how to do it. And I'd like to thank the Wellcome for allowing me to share this with you, and here's some contacts. If you want to get in touch with them, they're more than welcome to share their experience and talk to you about that. Now, because we've got, I'm running out of time, what I'm going to do is just run to one last thing, which is that one of the things that we did with the Midnight Run was we enabled people to come back into King's College London in the middle of the night and to do activities in the middle of the night. We did this in other cultural institutions, to be able to come into their institutions in the middle of the night, to feel that they had ownership, that they were reappropriating that space and doing new things. We have writable walls in this particular space here where people could write up about their experiences. And I took those 5 values and we did them as social experiments. And we got some interesting results from that, which was that the older people that we took on the second Midnight Run, which we called the Midnight Stroll, it was 4 hours, they were all over 80. We had quite a big dropout rate. We had 10 organized. A lot of them, some of them had heart attacks, flu, etc. Couldn't make it, you know. But for those who engaged, it was a very interesting experience for them because they said, we've never come into these organizations before. We would never come in and feel like we were re-owning these cultural institutions and being able to do new things. And this, for me, was a key issue. That's the first time in that room that I've written what I feel, responded to those questions, left it up there for anybody else to read. For the first time in the last 10 years, I didn't let myself worry about being judged or whether it was good enough, whatever. I just left it out there. And there was some peace that came with that. I just allowed myself to be and to feel enriched. I feel energized by that and empowered by that.
Out in the rain is where I choose to roam. Can't find no peace of mind inside the home, in search of the song I was listening to all alone. Rain, drench me to my bones. Causing traffic jams, articulate the city's drone as fast. A driver's open window, he's yelling down his mobile phone. Oh, so hot, oh, so heavy. Roads and furious today, and the rain keeps on pouring, carrying the day away. Where are we going to leave
I think London is a lovely place. You're free here. You can do anything, go anywhere, say anything you want to say.
It's a very interesting society. Yes.
Meet different people.
Good and bad, you know how. And it's changing all the time.
One of them's alive.
So just to finish there and just say, so for me, it's about values. Focus on your values. Focus on how you can provide evidence for the values that you hold dear, for the values that your audiences hold dear, for the values of the people who are part of your community. And this is where success lies. It's not all about digital. It's not all about collections or the wine or the glass or the drinking, but it is about values. Thank you very much.